hey, I believe that this is a familiar experience to all of us. We go and take a photograph, and then we look at it afterwards, and it's nothing that we expected. It's typically much worse than we anticipated at the time taking the picture. Or we show our picture to our friends, picture that we like ourselves, and then he looks at it and he's like, yeah. So there's a gap, first of all, between our own experience of what we see and what we can capture in a photograph. And then there's a gap between what we see in a photograph and what somebody else sees in the same photograph. And understanding those gaps better, those differences better, I think can improve us as photographers. So here's a little bit of armchair psychology to you, because I've been thinking about this and I think I'm after something. So a little bit about psychology and biology. First of all, when we look at things around us, it's always multi-sensory experience. We see things, but we also at the same time we hear and we smell, we can even touch and taste things. And it's the combination of this input that creates our experience. Whereas a photograph, we can only look at a photograph. It's only one sense. The second thing is that our eyesight, when we look at things in the real life, it's optimized for that. For example, we can focus on things extremely fast. I can look at things very close and then far away, and my eye is immediately focused to the thing I want to look at. But it's a very narrow focus and I can see the thing but almost nothing else. Optimized like that. By the way, an interesting thing is that while our eye can focus on a thing and see it crystal clear, our vision for movement and recognizing movement is differently optimized, and it's better in our peripheral vision. Remember back in the days when we used to have old-fashioned TVs and they would flicker. If you would watch the TV, it was in your focus, you would not see the flickering. But if you looked elsewhere and you would see the TV receiver only in the corner of your eye, you could see it flickering. You know, some people say that that's our survival tool. Like back in the caveman times, we could see a tiger approaching from the corner of our eye while we are focusing on our cave paintings. I don't know, but that's a fact. And then another biological fact is that the focus we can focus on is extremely narrow. To the extent that my friend built a business on that. He founded a company, he used to work for me back in the days, and he founded a company called Varjo. That's a shadow in Finnish. And they created technology and headsets, AR headsets, augmented reality and virtual reality headsets. Now, one of the main problems in that technology is that you need to draw a vast area of pixels sharply, because we can suddenly look left and right and it needs to be sharp, otherwise it doesn't feel realistic. But it's computationally extremely expensive. So his idea in IPR was not to draw everything, but only the place you look at. And his glasses would follow your eyesight, your iris, and only draw that part of the screen sharply that you were looking at. And being able to move with your eye immediately to another place and then draw that sharply, thus reducing computational needs a lot. So this is not only a theory, it's a fact, because you can build a business on that our vision is optimized for a narrow, sharp focus. That's a second interesting observation. The third interesting thing is that our perception is geared towards familiar things, things that we already know. Some of that is inbuilt, genetic, we were born with. Small babies are optimized to recognize faces. If you draw just a simple smiley face on a piece of a paper and show it to a baby, they start to react to that at a very early age. But if you just draw some random lines, you don't get any kind of reaction. So that's inbuilt recognition of faces. But even more than that, we are geared towards recognizing something that we have learned. I mean, I bet you have the same experience I did. You buy a car, and then suddenly, while driving on the road, you see similar cars all over the place. It's like the same Monday morning everybody else have the same idea of buying that particular brand and color. And of course that is not true, but it's that your perception, your observation is now optimized to see the same car because it's familiar to you. So I think these three things are really important for us to understand. The fact that photography is not multi-sensorial but only visual, then how our vision works, it's optimized on focusing on a narrow thing. And then the third thing, our interest and our attention to familiar things. Now, what then happens when we look at the photograph? When I look at this photograph of a boat, I can have all that sensory feeling brought from my memory. I was there on the boat. Looking at this picture, I can still feel the breeze in my hair and the smell of the gasoline and the sound of the engine. When you are looking at this picture, you have none of that because you went on the boat. My experience as a photographer is easily much different than you as a viewer. Somehow that needs to be taken into account. And so then how do I make sure that the visual information is enough? And as a viewer, I don't need that other sensory information to make this an interesting picture. How do I remove that unnecessary sensory information from my own experience as a photographer? Couple of tricks. Print it. Create a new sensory experience. New sounds, new smells, new breeze in your hair. And take it out from that original context to a new context. Show it to a friend who doesn't have that other sensory information. Just sees the picture, ask his opinion, trust his opinion. Give it some time, put the picture aside for a couple of months and then look at it again. Does it still speak to you now that you have distanced yourself from the other sensory feelings? I mean, these are some of the tricks that might be helpful. Then, what about then focusing? How can I help the viewer to focus where I, as a photographer, want him to focus? I can use multiple tricks. First of all, of course, like compositional tricks, leading lines and other things to draw the attention to places I want the viewer to focus. Narrow depth of field, to unfocus things where I explicitly don't want him to focus on. That's a powerful tool. Cropping, making sure that there are no things in this picture that I don't want him to focus on. Keeping it clean. So having these means to guide the eye of the viewer to focus on things that I want him or her to focus on. Then what about the familiarity? Now that's a tough cookie. Let me show you as an example a picture here. What is this thing, you might wonder? I mean, it's a strange picture if you don't know what I'm photographing. It actually is an analog sequencer, step sequencer, to create electronic music. I know all that. It's a familiar thing to me, so I look at it as such and it draws my attention because it's familiar to me. Not to you though, so I as a photographer need to ask, what gives me the right and power to ask you to focus on something that you don't know and you don't care about? That's a tall order. That's a lot to ask. Now here's another picture, similar lighting, but now a familiar thing. We all have experiences of Monday morning, miserable Monday mornings, coffee cups, coffee stains. You know what I'm talking about? It's a familiar experience, a familiar feeling. So I don't need to ask you to learn anything new. You can just experience my photograph. So this is not science, of course. And there are multiple exceptions to these three rules. Like, we are sometimes fascinated when we see an abstract photograph or something that we don't know what it is. And we go and wonder. But as I said, that's a lot to ask. Does my picture have enough to push the viewer above that cliff to the other side? Can I make my picture understood even though it's a bit difficult to understand? And then, of course, breaking some rules, like, for example, in compositional, leading the viewer. Maybe we can sometimes let him find something that we did not intend it for him to find. And that makes it an interesting photograph. A viewer can see whatever he sees, and that makes it interesting. But once again, it's a lot to ask. I believe that these three ingredients have some power. Remove yourself as a photographer from the time you took the picture and look at it only as an artifact. Help the viewer by guiding his clear vision and his focus to the places you want him to focus on. And then be extra careful when you photograph something that is not familiar, because it's a lot to ask. So hey, it's been a long video, but hey, one more thing. Kind of to sum this up. Can we learn something from artificial intelligence? I know this is a scary topic, and I'm not interested in artificial intelligence creating pictures. First of all, artificial intelligence can't create photographs, but it certainly can create pictures. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in artificial intelligence as a software engineer, but that's a totally other topic. But now that AI has stolen all our pictures, can we steal something back? And here's my thinking. When we create pictures using when they create pictures using artificial intelligence, we don't. How does that happen? They write a prompt. They describe the photograph. If I would try to create something like this, I'm describing the visual aspects of it, not what the sheep smells like. It's irrelevant. I wouldn't put it into that prompt. I also talk about the things that I want the viewer to focus, what are important. Sheep, cliff, ocean. Already the things that deserve the attention of the viewer. And then it needs to be familiar for me to be able to put it in words. I mean, if I don't understand it, I can't put it in words. So maybe this prompt creation is an actually interesting exercise when we are taking a picture. Before we press the shutter, can we create a prompt of what we are photographing? Therefore, can we focus on essentials? Can we make it understood? Almost to the extent of Wittgenstein, the famous philosopher who said, Wovon man nicht sprechen kann, darüber muss man schweigen. So, translated into photography world, if you cannot put it in words, maybe it's not to be photographed. And on that sacrilegious thought, it's finally time to end. Thank you so much for watching. Next time, something else.